Thank you, Mr. President. Our nation has gone through a difficult, bruising presidential election. And normally we would be making the pivot, healing those wounds. But this election has been particularly rough, and the wounds sustained during the campaign continue to haunt our nation. Many groups of Americans across our country are frightened for the future of being deported, of being targeted as Muslims, of resurgent racism toward African Americans, of anti-Semitism, of losing their right to marry the person they love. Unfortunately, they have good reason to be afraid. We have seen a surge, a wave of hateful, bigoted, racist, sexist attacks happening in communities across our country since the election. The divisive rhetoric and conduct of President-elect Donald Trump's campaign over the past year and a half is responsible for unleashing this blight on our country. And he has the responsibility to turn things around, to put an end to this division, and to start the healing. That's why earlier today, 10 of my colleagues joined me here in the Senate to send a letter to President-elect Trump, demanding that he stand up and condemn the verbal and physical attacks taking place across this country, that he denounce his own past campaign rhetoric that gave life to so many of these acts of hate and violence, and that he exclude proponents of hatred and discrimination from the ranks of his administration, including immediately firing white supremacist Steve Bannon as his chief strategist. Here is what the text of the letter says. Mr. President-elect, your campaign conduct and your victory have unleashed a wave of verbal and physical assaults against our fellow Americans. In just the last 6 days, the Southern Poverty Law Center has documented hundreds of acts of discrimination and violence towards many of the ethnic and social groups you attacked in your campaign. These attacks are absolutely unacceptable. We condemn them, and we stand united with our fellow citizens. The letter continues. Unfortunately, these acts of hate have been enabled by your campaign strategy of promoting bigotry, racism, and sexism. It is the logical consequence of your campaign attacks on and discrimination aimed at Hispanics, African Americans, veterans, immigrants, women, Muslims, Jews, and individuals with disabilities. Millions of Americans see a president-elect who has chosen to knock them down rather than to lift them up. Your conduct has empowered too many Americans to act on their darkest impulses. We continue the letter. This is the wrong vision for America and the wrong path for your coming administration. We call on you to change course. We urge you, as our future president, to join us in rejecting hate and embracing respect for every ethnicity, race, and gender. We urge you to join us in fighting for a nation free of discrimination, where every child has the opportunity to thrive and to contribute according to his or her ability. We urge you to join us in fighting for our constitutional vision of equality and opportunity and the vision in our Pledge of Allegiance of liberty and justice for all. The letter continues, as you assume the mantle of leadership in office, Mr. President-elect, it is your responsibility to put an end to the crimes of hate and prejudice sweeping our nation. These wounds to our national citizenry are of your making. It is your responsibility to rectify this damage. You have the power, as president-elect and as president, to move beyond the hate-filled rhetoric of your campaign. We call on you to repudiate your campaign attacks against diverse communities of Americans. We call on you to address the American people and demand that all Americans end these verbal and physical attacks and replace their acts of hatred with acts of kindness. We call on you to exclude the proponents of discrimination and hatred from the ranks of your administration, and that includes immediately firing Steve Bannon as your chief strategist. The letter concludes, "It is time for you to act boldly and powerfully to put our nation on a path of healing for the sake of all Americans. We call on you to rise to the challenge." And it is signed, in addition to myself, Senator Mazie Hirono, and Senator Elizabeth Warren, and Senator Sherrod Brown, and Senator Ed Markey, and Senator Bernie Sanders, and Senator Al Franken, who spoke so eloquently a few moments ago, Senator Ron Wyden, and Senator Debbie Stabenow, Senator-elect Chris Van Hollen, and Senator Tom Carper. And I thank my colleagues who have appropriately said this moment, this unusual moment in our history, in our time here in the 21st century, that we have a president-elect playing on hate and prejudice and bringing a white supremacist in as a chief advisor is unacceptable. Now, some will say that President-elect Trump cannot himself be accountable for what is happening across our country. But they are wrong. His words and his conduct are directly connected to the harassment and the physical and verbal assaults that we are seeing. And I'm going to share with you all the comments of the campaign and the acts of citizens in category after category to show how these are tied together, how indeed these verbal assaults and these physical assaults are motivated by and justified by the campaign of our president-elect. Just to emphasize that it is time for our president-elect to take responsibility, to change course, to embrace the connectedness of our American communities, the vision of equality of opportunity in our Constitution, the vision of a nation with justice for all, and the fact that our president should be working to raise up all families, not raising up a few by tearing down the rest. Let's start by looking at what Mr. Trump said about our nation's Latino citizens. At the start of his campaign, Mr. Trump said, and I quote, "When Mexico sends its people, they're not sending the best. They're sending people with lots of problems, bringing those problems with them. They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists, and some, I assume," he added, "are good people." Later in one campaign, he promised to build a wall, a great, great wall on our southern border, and I will make Mexico pay for that wall, mark my words. When discussing Judge Gonzalo Curiel, a U.S. district judge presiding over a lawsuit against Trump University, by the way, an American-born citizen, the president-elect said the judge couldn't be impartial, should be removed from the case because the judge is of Mexican heritage. Judge Curiel, born, raised in Indiana. And Mr. Trump's right-hand man, his designated chief strategist, Steve Bannon, used his position at Breitbart News to continue attacks against Latinos. Under his leadership, Breitbart frequently used anti-immigrant slurs and published war on Spanish and nativist-appealing content in his quest to make his platform a platform for white nationalism. It's important to note that even as many Republicans and conservative commentators believe that Mr. Bannon is a man with unconscionable views and frightening ties to white supremacist movements. John Weaver, a former top advisor to Governor John Kasich, tweeted of Mr. Bannon's selection as chief strategist, quote, "The racist, fascist, extreme right is represented footsteps from the Oval Office." Ann Navarro, a Republican strategist, called Bannon, quote, "white supremacist, anti-gay, anti-Semite, vindictive," and Anna then said, "Betrayed America." Glenn Beck, known to all of us as a right-wing radio commentator, very conservative commentator, person who has attacked virtually every idea to help working America that comes from the blue side of the aisle. Glenn Beck said, Bannon is, quote, "terrifying," and that he has helped to give voice to white nationalists. Former KKK leader David Duke and the American Nazi Party have praised Bannon's elevation to the White House. So there should be no mistaking or sugarcoating what precisely this individual, Steve Bannon, stands for. Under his leadership, Breitbart became a leader in anti-Latino, nativist material. One headline after another attacking Hispanics here in America. So when we look at what's happening right at this moment to Latinos today, what do we see? We see students in our schools taunting and bullying their classmates. At DeWitt Junior High School in Lansing, Michigan, white students formed a human wall and refused to let their Latino classmates into the school. In Ventura, California, a Latino mother reported seeing fifth graders at her child's school chanting, "Build a wall." Latinos all across our nation are being harassed and told they're going to be deported. They don't belong here in America, even if they were born here in America. In Andover, Massachusetts, a group of white men in a car threw a water bottle at a young Hispanic woman and screamed, "Time to go back to your country." Insert expletive. "My man Trump," they continued, "is on top now, and we don't want you here." In Southern California, a college student was accosted by a man who said, "I can't wait until Trump asks us to rape you people and send you back over the biggest damn wall we're going to build. Go back to hell." And then he inserted a racist slur for a Mexican and then threw water in the young woman's face. And walls all across the nation are being spray painted with phrases like, "Build the wall higher." In the face of attacks like these, it's hard to remember that we are indeed a nation of immigrants. Unless you are 100% Native American, you are the child or grandchild or great-grandchild, you are the descendant of immigrants. And your forefathers and foremothers came to our country and felt they'd come to a place where they could thrive. We have those beautiful words carved into the base of the Statue of Liberty. "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free," and inspires all of us. And each one of us, again, unless we're 100% Native American, have an ancestor who came to the country and felt that moment of freedom and opportunity, no matter where they had come from. Latinos are not the only group of Americans suffering because of the rhetoric of the Trump campaign. African Americans have become a significant target in post-Trump America, as too many take their cues from our next president's words and actions towards that community. Words like the ones that President-elect Trump used to talk about African Americans who worked for him. He said, and I quote, "I've got black accountants at Trump Castle and Trump Plaza, black guys counting my money. I hate it. The only kind of people I want counting my money are short guys wearing yarmulkes." He then went on to say, quote, "I think the guy is lazy. It's probably not his fault because laziness is a trait in blacks. It really is. I believe that. It's not anything they can control." End of quote. Those are the words of our president-elect. And when he talked about the Black Lives Matter movement on Fox News, he said, "I think they're trouble. I think they're looking for trouble." He often shows a startling disconnect with the African American community, generalizing that they all live in inner cities that he regularly describes as poverty-stricken war zones. And this disconnect started very early on in his real estate career, when President-elect Trump was publicly sued twice for discriminating against African Americans who were trying to rent apartments in his buildings. Of course, we can't talk about President-elect Trump's relations with the African American community without bringing up his long-standing promotion and advocacy of the birther movement, which tried to delegitimize our country's first African American president. Those efforts go back to 2011, when Mr. Trump was considering a run for the White House and said on one talk show, quote, "If he wasn't born in this country, which is a real possibility, he's pulled off one of the great cons in the history of politics." And he went on and on and on, month after month, questioning the legitimacy of our president in office. Now, to his credit, on that particular point, Mr. Trump has recanted himself. But he used it as a race card time after time after time to delegitimize our president, President Obama, because he's African American. And the views of President-elect Trump's right-hand man, his chief strategist, Steve Bannon, aren't any better. Under Bannon's leadership, Breitbart created a news section titled Black Crime. Just 2 weeks after the Charleston massacre, in which 9 African-American churchgoers were slaughtered, Breitbart ran this headline. And by the way, in that attack, the attacker used the Confederate flag as a symbol, a racist symbol, to justify attacking these 9 individuals. And what did Steve Bannon do? He ran the headline, "Hoist it high and proud, the Confederate flag proclaims a glorious heritage." And in a lengthy July post on Breitbart, Bannon accused the left of a plot to take down America by fixating on police shootings of black citizens. Well, the list goes on and on. Proceeded to say, there are, after all, in this world, some people who are naturally aggressive and violent. Certainly a direct racist statement. And what is the result that we see today? Of all of this racism from our president-elect and from his chief strategist, well, we have seen a startling rise in people's willingness to use the N-word in public. At a school in Maple Grove, Minnesota, a boy's bathroom was defaced by graffiti that included racial slurs like the N-word and porch monkeys, alongside pro-Trump messages like Trump train and Make America Great Again. Students from the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse who were living off campus found the quote, "Go home," and the N-word written on their front door. A man in Knoxville, Tennessee woke up one morning to find his car vandalized with the phrase, and I'm paraphrasing, expletive deleted you, insert N-word, and then the word Trump spray painted on his car. And we've seen incidents hearkening back to a time in history of discrimination and segregation. At a high school in Jacksonville, Florida, an individual put up these signs, colored and whites only. The time of Jim Crow in America, where African Americans were treated as second-class citizens. And a whites only sign was found on a door of a bathroom stall in a high school in Duluth, Minnesota. These are just a few of the incidents. But then there's the assaults as well. One incident after another of African Americans being assaulted, like the softball field dugout in Wellsview, New York, where the phrase, "Make America White Again," was spray painted. The harassment of Wall in Durham, North Carolina, where someone decided to write, "Black lives don't matter, and neither does your vote." A horrific incident in my home state of Oregon, in which an African-American woman was attacked in a parking lot of a grocery store in Hillsboro, Oregon. A group of 3 men threw a brick at her, broke her ribs, called her the N-word. They threatened to rape her, and they said, "Now, we finally have a president who feels how we feel." It's hard to imagine how our president-elect, with his own racist commentary, his own past acts of discrimination, his own racist campaign, his own racist chief strategist, isn't at all connected to these events sweeping the country. They are directly connected. And that's why we're calling on the president-elect to change course. The election is behind us. Before you are 4 years of opportunities to improve the lives of Americans. Take the assaults of the past and make them the assaults of the past. Look to the vision of partnership to build a better America in the years ahead. Leave that past behind. Martin Luther King Jr. once said, "Human progress is neither automatic nor inevitable. Every step toward the goal of justice requires sacrifice, suffering, and struggle, the tireless exertions and passionate concern of dedicated individuals." Let's make that the spirit of the next 4 years, where we are dedicated together to progress for all Americans to reach that goal of opportunity and equality and justice. Another target has been our women across the country. Our president-elect repeatedly treated women as sexual objects. Women who have worked so hard to be seen as equals in our society. Women have flown as astronauts. They've reached the heights of science. They've reached peak after peak of leadership across our country. They bring their insight and wisdom into this chamber here, the U.S. Senate, and the House, 100 yards across Capitol Hill. But our president-elect has seen it differently. He said, "It doesn't really matter what they write," referring to the media, "as long as you've got a young and beautiful piece of," and insert a demeaning term for women. Or who declared that you don't give a, insert expletive, if a girl can play a violin like the greatest violinist in the world, you want to know, what does she look like? Our president-elect derided a political opponent by commenting on our looks, saying, "Look at that face. Would anybody vote for that? Can you imagine that? The next face of our president?" During the campaign, our president-elect called a female lawyer disgusting, or at some point in the past had called a female lawyer disgusting because she asked to take a medical break during a court case to pump breast milk for her 3-month-old daughter. I think we're all aware of the comments he made towards Fox News debate moderator Megyn Kelly. Words I think I'll just choose not to repeat at this moment. And that he said pregnant women are an inconvenience for his business. And of course, our president-elect was caught on tape bragging about sexually assaulting women, saying, "I'm just automatically attracted to the beautiful. I just start kissing. It's like a magnet. Just kiss. I don't even wait." And then he went on to talk about groping the women and being able to get away with it because he's a star. And he's brought into the White House his chief strategist, Steve Bannon, who shares these views about women, putting up a headline, "There's no hiring bias against women. They just suck at interviews." Or another that said, "The solution to online harassment? Women should log off." Or here's another, "Would you rather your child had feminism or cancer?" As if women's rights are a disease. And we see that these comments of the president-elect's conduct and comments and his chief strategist's comments have had an impact. 2 men at a concert in Ohio threatened to Donald Trump and female security guard because she wouldn't let them into a restricted section of the venue. According to one teacher, a 10-year-old girl was taken home from school after a male classmate grabbed her private parts, and when asked why he did it, the boy said, "If a president can do it, he can do it too." And in Oklahoma City, a woman was chased on the highway because of her Hillary bumper sticker, while the men in the other car hurled sexual insults at her. And these are just a small number of the hundreds and hundreds of events happening across this country. Every member of this body, every member of the Senate can relate stories from the people who have shared them over the past few weeks. of the harassment that they have suffered, their constituents who have written to them to share the harassment they have suffered. We have just had a historic milestone. We have, for the first time, had a woman as the nominee of a major political party. And not only that, she got a lot more votes than did Donald Trump. The women's suffrage movement has come so far since the days when Elizabeth Cady Stanton said, quote, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal, and that the history of the past is but one long struggle toward equality." We've come a long ways in the few decades since Martin Luther King said the long arc, or the moral arc of the universe, is long, but it bends towards justice. And across our country, citizens have worked to bend that arc in this vision of a nation that embraces opportunity for all, not opportunity only for the rich and powerful to have more opportunity. Opportunity for all, for every child to have the ability to contribute to this country. My father, now deceased, my father was a mechanic, never went to college. But he told me when I was in grade school, he said, "Son, if you go through the doors of that schoolhouse and you work hard, you can do just about anything here in America." That's the vision. That's the vision that we want to strive towards, where the son of a mechanic, the daughter of a janitor, the child of a Hispanic couple or an African American couple or a gay couple or lesbian couple, where every child has the opportunity to thrive. And to do that, we have to set aside these racist attacks, these sexist attacks. Well, another target has been our Muslim American community. For the last year and a half, they, like other groups of Americans, have been denigrated and insulted by Mr. Trump, President-elect Trump, and his campaign. His campaign has worked to fan the flames of Islamophobia. Take Mr. Trump's views on registering Muslim Americans. When asked whether the U.S. should have a registry of Muslims, he said, "I would certainly implement that. Absolutely. There should be a lot of systems beyond databases. We should have a lot of systems." And when the reporter followed by asking, would Muslims be required to register, he answered, "They have to be. They have to be," he repeated. Well, let me share with the President-elect that we are not a nation that discriminates because of your religion. It's called freedom of religion. And our vision is opportunity for all. Now, there were nations that discriminated based on religion. Those were European nations. That's why a lot of our forefathers came here, to escape that oppression and to have the freedom to thrive and to maintain the religious views that they wanted to have, not what somebody else told them had to be, or would imprison them or register them for discrimination because of their religious background. So when any American attacks our Muslim American brothers and sisters, we need to stand with them, shoulder to shoulder. And if any other religious group is attacked, we need to stand with them shoulder to shoulder and stand for the vision of opportunity and equality for all. And that's what every member of this chamber should be coming down here to say, that when those are attacked, we will stand with them, because that is not the vision of America. That is not the spirit of America. It certainly is 100% contrary to the vision of America. Our President-elect fomented fear of Muslims seeking refuge in our nation from war zones. He told a crowd in Minneapolis that allowing refugees into our country will import generations of terrorism, extremism, radicalism into your schools and throughout your communities. This statement is so far diverged from the truth as to make it impossible to recognize where he got this notion. Every expert will tell you that if a terrorist wants to come into our nation, the hardest path is to come as a refugee. You have to go to refugee camp. You have to be registered. You have to be vetted for years. And if you're male, you're probably not going to make it. But because the goal was to foment Islamophobia, this lie was repeated again and again. Much easier to come into our country on a tourist visa, a business visa, a student visa, not a refugee settlement visa. Our president-elect told the same crowd that refugees settling in Minnesota were joining the ISIS and spreading their extremist views all over our country. And now there are reports from some connected with the transition team that the incoming administration is considering implementing a system for registering Muslim Americans, just as President-elect Trump talked about, and using our country's shameful internment of Japanese Americans to justify this idea because it's a precedent. Let me be clear, imprisoning fellow Americans, as we did during World War II, was a shameful and dark chapter and a mistake. And we need to make sure we remember that it was a mistake and never use it as a precedent for action in the future. And then again, here we have our President-elect's chief strategist, Steve Bannon, who has run headlines like "Political correctness protects the Muslim rape culture," or, quote, "Immediately after Muslim mayor elected, London's iconic buses proclaimed, 'Glory to Allah.'" Mr. Bannon has personally suggested we're in a global war against Islam. So it's no wonder that the rhetoric of our president-elect and leader of the white supremacist website is causing discrimination and confrontation with Muslim Americans around our country. Some are being physically assaulted, like the woman at San Jose University who lost her balance and choked when a man attempted to rip off her headscarf, or the Muslim student at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign campus who reported having a knife pulled on her. And then there are those who are verbally abused and otherwise intimidated, including a woman riding the BART train in San Francisco who was accosted when another passenger called her a terrorist who should be deported. And a pickup truck that has been driving around Brooksville, Florida, with writing on it that says, "All Muslims are terrorists, deport them all. I hate Muslims." And in Georgia, a Muslim teacher found a note left for her that said, "Headscarf isn't allowed anymore," and telling her, "Hang yourself with it." That is the Islamophobia sweeping our nation at this very moment, inspired by the rhetoric of our president-elect and his chief strategist, Steve Bannon. And it's unacceptable. It needs to stop. As Robert Kennedy once said, I quote, "America's answer to the intolerant man is diversity, the very diversity which our heritage of religious freedom has inspired." We need to embrace that heritage. We need to cherish that heritage. And we need to strive to live up to the best instincts of our nation, not the darkest impulses. Yet another group that is feeling threatened is our LGBTQ community. And I will note that Donald Trump in his campaign did not attack our LGBT community. And he said on 60 Minutes the other night, when the question of same-sex marriage came up, he said that's settled. But actions speak as well as words. And of all the possible men and women he could choose as a running mate, he chose now President-elect Mike Pence, the most anti-LGBTQ governor in America. This individual is someone who has signed a draconian religious liberty law in Indiana that empowers individuals and businesses to discriminate against the LGBT community. Our Vice President-elect supported conversion therapy to change people's sexual behavior. And as a radio host, he gave a speech that declared marriage equality would lead to societal collapse. And Mr. Trump's chief strategist echoes much of this. One headline on Breitbart News said, "Dear straight people, I'm officially giving you permission to say," and then it goes on to list anti-LGBTQ slurs. Another headline that he put up on his website said, "Gay rights have made us dumber. It's time to get back in the closet." And yet another headline said, "Kids raised by same-sex couples twice as likely to be depressed, fat adults." And how has this kind of rhetoric impacted our nation since the election? A gay couple in Ogden, Utah, woke up to find their car vandalized with anti-gay slurs painted on the side. Rainbow flags, the symbol of the LGBTQ movement around the world, were burned in Rochester, New York. And an individual in North Carolina found a note on a car that said, "Can't wait till your marriage is overturned by a real president. Gay families equal burn in hell, Trump, 2016. Like so many of the other groups of Americans that I have talked about, the LGBTQ community has struggled for a long time to be accepted, to be recognized as full members of our society, to not be discriminated against when they seek employment in our country, to have the same rights against discrimination that we adopted for race and gender and ethnicity in 1964. We've come a ways, but we haven't yet made it to that point that we have provided the same foundation against discrimination that we provided in 1964 to other groups. So while Donald Trump himself did not attack the LGBT community, the person he chose as vice president and the person he elevated to chief strategist for the White House very much have. And that is a powerful, powerful message that has unleashed attacks across this country. As our next president, Donald Trump has a responsibility to put an end to the prejudice and to put an end to the hate crimes sweeping our nation, to calm the fears and anxieties of millions of Americans who are frightened about their future in this country, about whether they will have an opportunity to contribute in this country, whether they will be fired from their job, whether their car will be vandalized, whether their children will be taunted and bullied, whether they will be attacked in a parking lot. Across the nation, thousands of people have been turning out to walk the streets and to protest. They're trying to send a message. Now, sometimes that message has gone off track. In Portland, Oregon, thousands turned out to send this message to our president-elect. Put the hate speech and hate acts behind you. Don't bring white supremacists or deeply prejudiced individuals into your administration. Let's have a next 4 year that embraces all Americans and their opportunity to succeed. They're trying to send a message by walking with their feet from park to park, across bridges, through the streets. Unfortunately, some anarchists decided to destroy the effectiveness of this protest by breaking windows and setting some fires. The organizers of these protests condemned the anarchists, tried to keep them out, and most of the protests have succeeded. But I ask for our president-elect, if you won't listen to those of us who are publicly asking you to change course, and if you won't listen to my colleagues who are privately calling you and saying to you and your team, change course, then listen to the people in the streets across America who are trying to peacefully convey the message that we are a diverse nation with a fabulous vision of embracing people of every religion and every ethnicity and every race. Let's continue that tradition. Let's strengthen that tradition. Let's build on that tradition. That is the message that all of us are trying to send. So I join my colleagues to repeat the request we've made on the floor here of the Senate, and the letter that we sent to you, the message sent privately by many of my colleagues sitting across the aisle, message sent by many of our leaders from civil rights groups and other organizations who have contacted the transition team, a message that is echoed with thousands and thousands of emails sent here to Capitol Hill to ask us to help convey this message. From every direction, Americans are reaching out and saying, end the hate speech, end the hate commentary, bring people into your administration who believe in opportunity and justice for all. Change directions. It's a time for leadership. It's a time for our president-elect, Donald Trump, to rise to the occasion and to help build a nation that provides a foundation for every American to thrive. Thank you, Mr. President.